Welcome back. Thanks for joining me for this third installment of building the 5S compliant shop cabinets for your woodworking shop. We've got a lot to do today. We've got to drill our shelf pin holes so we can finally glue these cabinets up. Once we get them assembled, glued up, and set aside to dry, then we need to make our face frames. So let's get to work. Alright, so we've been making shelf pin holes here, and I just want to show you the setup real quick. Now, because this particular cabinet is a really narrow 6-inch inside depth cabinet, I didn't want to get these holes in too close to the middle where the shelf might rock. Now, typically your setback from the edge would be either 1.5 inches, 2 or 2.5. And what I really wanted to have was 1.25 inches along what is the front of the cabinet, and then really from the back of this board 1.75 inches. But if you look at it from the back, it's actually 1 inch. That'll give me stability. So the way I did that was to cut a couple of spacers. I've got a 3/4 inch spacer and a 1/4 inch spacer. The 1/4 inch spacer is used on the side with the notches. And of course, this large notch here is the top of the cabinet. So we're doing all registration off the top of the cabinet. So we take our template and take a pin and drop it in to the registration hole in the very end. And that is going to go against the edge of the rabbet, on top of the rabbet and against the edge. That's just where I decided I liked it. Okay, so get that pushed up to the inside edge of the rabbet, and then we're going to put our registration pins in the 2-inch slot. And I've got a piece of blue tape marking my starter hole. No reason to drill holes up this high in the cabinet. And I wanted to start them all in the same place, so I've got a little piece of blue tape there to remind me where to start. And I just want to clamp this down so it doesn't move. And to drill my first hole here, now it's clamped down, I've got to remove this pin. All right, now after drilling those first holes, I've got to go a little bit further. So what I'm going to do is pull the pins out, and I'm going to dump this sawdust. Now I'm using a down shear bit, so it does pile up some sawdust in the holes, and I want to be able to see them, and I also need to use them. So we're going to put our pin back in the 2-inch registration hole, 2-inch registration hole, pull it up to the side here, and now we're going to take the longer end of the pin and just put it down in one of our 1/4 inch holes we've already drilled. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more to go. That looks about right. So let's just clamp this down. And there we go. All right, so we're in great shape now on this side. Now what we want to do is we want to turn this around, and we're going to get our 3/4 inch spacer, and I've labeled this top to make sure my orientation never changes. And remember, we're registering off of the top of the cabinet. So I'm going to move my locator pin down to this end, set that on top of the rabbet, and pull it up to the rabbet edge. I'm going to put this through the 2-inch registration mark and pull it up. And my blue painter's tape is pointing at my first hole. Clamp that into place. And we're ready to go again. Now this shelf pin template can be used with a self-centering drill bit like a snappy, and it'll work just fine, but I wanted really crisp, clean holes. And sometimes in plywood, no matter how good your brad point bit might be, you'll get some splintering around the holes. And these are just really clean, crisp holes. Let me show you a close-up of that. The router does such a nice job on these holes, no splintering at all. And there we go. So when the two cabinet sides are put together, this is what it's going to look like. Just like that. Looks pretty good. All right, it would appear that we're ready to do our first glue up. Hopefully I've got the clamps that I need out here. I've got some paper down on top of my outfeed table, which I know is nice and flat, and I'm ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by attaching the back into the two side pieces. We're just going to run a little bead of glue here in the groove. And unfortunately, this plywood is pretty rough. It has a little bit of curvature to it, but this groove is going to straighten that out as we go along. There we go. And put some glue in this groove. And we should be able now to stand this up, if I can get a hold of it, and put this right in to the groove. And there we go. Okay. Now the next thing that we want to put in, it's going to allow us to square up the cabinet, is to put this piece in right down here. So we'll put some glue. All right, I've got my glue spreader. I'll spread that out a little bit. All right, now what we're going to do is going to push this back up flush, and I was afraid that was going to happen, so I'm ready. This glue tacks pretty quickly, so I'm going to use a clamp to draw that back down square. There we go. All right, now I can take this off because it's in there nice and square. Okay, next I'm going to add the bottom piece. And again, the good face is going towards the inside of the cabinet. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this in. Put a little glue down here in this rabbet. And we also need to glue this support piece where it comes in contact with the cabinet bottom. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and glue in the piece up here. And this time I think I'll be smart and put the glue on the workpiece itself. All right. And the reason I wanted to go ahead and put that piece in is because now I can put some clamps on the bottom here and start to get this trued up. All right, we've got one more piece to add up here at the top, and that is our French cleat piece. I'll go ahead and get some glue on this. And this is where our weight is going to be on the unit. So we want to make sure we get this glued in good. I'm not going to worry too much about squeeze out at this point. There we go. All right, it's looking pretty good. I think we are all set. So we've got, I'm doing 5 cabinets, so I've got to do this 4 more times, but that wasn't bad at all. Got the clamps off, and now people sometimes ask if I ever use any fasteners, and yes, absolutely I do. In fact, if you wanted to, you could actually use something like a 23 gauge pin nailer and put this whole cabinet together and not use any clamps. I'm going to use a couple of fasteners up here as what I call insurance on our French cleat infrastructure support piece. Now these are number 6 wood screws by 1.5 inches long. They're threaded up about, maybe a little over 2/3 of the way up, and the rest is unthreaded, what I'm calling the shank part of the screw. For pilot holes, you need to make a 5/32 inch pilot hole for the threaded part and a 9/32 inch hole for the unthreaded shank part. So what I'm going to do, I've marked my distances here. I've marked down 1.5 inches from the top of the cabinet and in 3/8 of an inch from the end, and that should put my screws right dead center in the middle of the plywood underneath. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drill my 5/32 inch hole all the way through the top piece and into the plywood underneath. Then I'm going to drill a 9/32 inch hole just through the hardwood. And I'm just going to countersink these by hand. A little countersink tool. And put in our screws. As I mentioned before, I have a lot of this soft maple left over from another project. It was rejected on that project for several reasons, but on this project for our wall cabinets in the shop, I think it's going to be just fine. Now I've taken all the rejected pieces from that other project and I've sort of split them into two groups. I've got a better looking batch that's going to be the frames around the doors, and I've got a less attractive batch that's going to be the face frames. They're still good pieces of wood, but they're just not quite as attractive. They'll be hidden by the door for the most part. Now, I've gone ahead and rejointed the edges of all of these leftover pieces of wood, and I marked the edge that I jointed so I'd remember which one it was. Now, I'm just going to rip these to width. Now, the rails and stiles on the face frame are going to be 1 3/4 inches wide. I've gone ahead, the vertical pieces or the stiles of the face frames, I've cut those to length. The rail pieces, I'm going to rip them to width, but I haven't cut those to length yet. I'll do that in a few minutes. So just got to get to ripping here. I'm cutting my rails to length now, the horizontal pieces for the face frames. Now, I'm a big believer that the absolute dimension in a piece like this is not as critical as the consistency of the dimension. In other words, you might be off a 32nd of an inch in the rails, but make sure it's a consistent off 32nd of an inch in both the top and the bottom rail, so that you get a square assembly. For that reason, I've set up a stop block and I can cut my rails with confidence that they'll be exactly the same length. I'm going to join the corners, the joints of the face frames with dominoes, with the Festool Domino machine. You could do this with biscuits, you could do it with pocket screws, whatever suits your fancy. To set up for the dominoes, I'm going to put 2 of these little tiny dominoes side by side in the corners. And what I did was I took a scrap, I'm calling this the rail, just to test this out. I made a mark at a 1/2 inch in from this edge and a mark in 1/2 inch in from this edge. Then I lined this up with the stile and I extended those lines across the joint. So now I've got my marks for my dominoes, and all I got to do is just cut them out. And we'll see how that fits. Now I cut these, if you've got the domino, you know you can change the sizes of the slots. I cut these on the smallest size. There wasn't really any need for any slop. And there we go. That looks pretty good. All right, so that's the way we're going to do it. All right, all of my vertical stile pieces are the same length, so I'm just mixing and matching here with the rails that I've cut to length to get sort of the most pleasing grain pattern. I'm not spending a ton of time with this, but if I can make it look halfway decent, that'll be nice. Then take the, as mentioned before, take the rail and mark in 1/2 inch from each edge. Then line up the rail and the stile flush at the bottom and make a mark across the joint for the dominoes. And I've numbered the corners so that I keep track of these parts before I glue them up. What, you want to see these? All right, I think that's going to look pretty good. All right, I'm going to finish cutting these Festool Domino mortises, and I'm going to glue up these face frames. In our next video, we're going to attach the face frames and start making the doors. That's going to be a lot of fun. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video, and thank you so much for watching this one.